Welcome to the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. I'm your program host, Ian Jones, and this is Season 7, Episode 20. According to the Feed America website, the number of children facing hunger in the United States rose during the pandemic from more than 10 million children in 2019 to nearly 12 million children in 2020. Families with children, especially single-parent families, are more likely to face hunger. Now, we often think of ourselves as the best country on the planet, but 12 million children, 10 million children, whatever the number, that's a lot of children that are hungry. And we often, wonder what we could do about it. Well, there are people that are trying to do something about it. I mentioned this at the beginning of the episode to highlight the importance of the work of my guest. Today, I'm talking to Carolyn Federman, who is the founder of Charlie Cart Project, a national nonprofit that provides tools and curriculum for food education in schools. Carolyn has worked in food education for more than a decade, leading Alice Waters' Edible Schoolyard Project, consulting on policy and program development for the Jamie Oliver Foundation, co-founding the Berkeley Food Institute, producing UC Berkeley's Edible Education course with Michael Pollan, and teaching cooking in her children's schools. She has a cookbook out, New Favorites for New Cooks, 50 Delicious Recipes for Kids to Make. It's a really wonderful cookbook, and I really love it myself and have used it myself, even though it's, focused on kids. It's a great cookbook for anybody. And I really enjoyed getting a chance to talk to Carolyn. She was a wonderful guest, and she was just really fun to have on the program. Without further ado, I'm going to go to my conversation with Carolyn Federman. Welcome to the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. Today, I'm talking to Carolyn Federman, who is the founder of the Charlie Cart Project, a national nonprofit that provides tools and curricula for food education in schools. Carolyn has worked in food education for more than a decade, leading Alice Waters' Edible Backyard Project, consulting on policy and program development for the Jamie Oliver Foundation, co-founding the Berkeley Food Institute, producing UC Berkeley's Edible Education course with Michael Pollan, and teaching cooking in her children's schools. Carolyn lives in local Berkeley, to me, California, with her 2 teenage children, and is also the author of New Favorites for New Cooks, 50 Delicious Recipes for Kids to Make, a cookbook that is not just for kids, because as an adult, I love the book too, and I'll tell you, it's worth a look. You're going to love it. Carolyn, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Dean. It's great to talk to you.
Now, I want to talk about your work with a hero of mine, Alice Waters, at the Edible Schoolyard Project for many years. I'm a fan of her work and Chez Panisse and her cookbooks. I'd love to hear you talk about, for our listeners who are not familiar with your work with the Edible Schoolyard Project.
Sure. So I started working with Alice in 2001. And it was really a funny story, if you don't mind. This is kind of a digression, but
not at all. No, this is good.
I was on maternity leave, and I had gone with a friend to make a presentation for her company. She needed somebody who could talk about being an events person, and even though I wasn't an event planner, she just asked me to come along because I didn't have anything else to do. And she wanted to make her company look a little more robust because it was new. So we did this pitch, and the person sitting across the table from us, who was from Levi's, she called me afterward and said, I know you're an event planner, which I wasn't. And my dear friend Alice Waters is looking, and I know you're also, recently moved to Berkeley, and my dear friend Alice Waters is looking for someone to plan this big event for her. Or actually, she said it was a small event. She called it like a picnic under the trees or something. And, would you go talk to her? I think you guys would really hit it off. So I said, sure. And I went to talk to Alice, and I had been to Chez Panisse, I think, one time in my life. I love food, and my mother was a great cook, but I really didn't know anything about restaurants or famous chefs or anything like that. And I went to sit with her, and we were in the downstairs of the restaurant, and she had this binder, and it was it had those sheet protectors, a really slippery kind.
Yeah.
And she was showing me pictures of this, that she had pulled from different magazines to demonstrate what kind of event she wanted to have, the feel of the event. And she opened the binder to pull something out, and those slippery sheets just went all over the room. And I said, why don't you just talk to me about the event, and I'll take care of this, So while she talked, I was picking up the papers, and long story short, that was basically our whole relationship for 20 years. I was putting things together and helping her package things and put things together, and she was having this big vision and relaying this big vision, and I was executing it. And it didn't end up being a small picnic under the trees. It ended up being 750 people with all the Chez Panisse alumni. It was the 30th anniversary of the restaurant. We did it under the Campanile at UC Berkeley, and it was really wonderful.
Now, the Edible Schoolyard Project, everybody that works with it is very humble, but you've touched a lot of people with this. Do you ever get any feedback later on from some of the people that were in it, some of the kids that are now older?
Yeah. Okay. So since I'm not there anymore, I don't hear as much, but when I was there, certainly there were kids who would come back and visit and say that they were studying culinary arts, or that they'd gone on to work in a restaurant. I've absolutely seen that impact with other kids. And then there's a couple of kids that my kids grew up with who have come back to me and said, because we did that, I created a little summer camp for my kids' friends, or I did other cooking projects. I had a couple kids who were involved in testing recipes for the cookbook, and they have come back to me and said that they're pursuing cooking, or that they worked in a restaurant, or that they just developed a love for cooking that they hadn't. And I had some parents also say the same.
You've worked for a time with British celebrity food star Jamie Oliver, who I just adore. Can we talk about that time?
Oh, sure. So that was in between Chez Panisse work. So I'd already left working for the Edible Schoolyard Project. And so that he was producing a television show in, I think it was Huntington, Indiana, maybe. Sorry, it was so long ago that I remember Huntington, but I don't remember the state. And Virginia, Huntington.
Oh, yeah.
Virginia,
yeah, that's right. That sounds right.
That's right. And so they were doing this TV show, and as part of the TV show, there was a campaign around it to just, create some policy initiatives. And one of the things, so there was a couple different pieces that I worked on. He had actually won a prize. He had won the TED Prize. And
yes.
At the time, what they did is I don't know if they still do this, but they would gather a whole team of pro bono folks to support the execution of the prize winner's vision. So they had like Chiat Day advertising firm, they had like top tier consultants come in. And so I was part of that team, which was really fun and interesting. And so what I did was I helped create toolkits for parents at schools who wanted to bring fresh scratch cooking to their schools, to help them, advocate for that to the PTA and to the administration. And then we did some policy work in LA Unified to remove chocolate milk from the menu.
Now, you were instrumental in helping to found the Berkeley Food Institute. Can we talk about that?
Oh yeah, that was a really great project. So I had been working with Michael Pollan and Alice Waters on this program called Edible Education 101. And that was a course, it was a survey course that we launched at UC Berkeley. Michael was the instructor, and we had a series of guest lectures. And that was such an interesting course because it was also open to the public.
Right.
And so there were like 400 kids in the class, and it was super popular class, and Michael's such a great teacher. And then we had a slew of really fantastic speakers on all the, various aspects of the food system. So that was really fun to work on. And at the time, I was struck that food systems is so critical to our future, and UC Berkeley's right here in the heart of California, that, why isn't there a food institute, or, there wasn't a food major or food systems minor, nothing like that. So I did a little research, and I figured out that how the institutes work at UC Berkeley. I talked to Michael Pollan about it, and he had a friend who was a donor who was involved in trying to get a position for educator and professor in food systems. So we got together, the three of us got together, and we just hatched this plan to go fight for a food institute. And so we wrote a proposal, we got some different departments together, and it kind of took off from there. And so I was involved for the first year. We had a symposium to kick off the launch of the Food Institute, and now it's just going strong. It's doing great.
In 2015, you and the other members of the Edible Schoolyard Project founded the Charlie Cart Project. For our listeners who are not familiar with the program, can you tell us a little bit about the Charlie Cart program and how it works?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I actually started it with this friend who's a designer from an organization called Celery Design. And so I had, I had just seen how impactful the Edible Schoolyard was. And also it's a pretty resource intensive program, and it would be great for different organizations that could not build out a full teaching kitchen to have some way to bring, to put it a different way, if you can't bring kids to the kitchen, you could bring the kitchen to the kids, was my thought. So I talked to this friend of mine who's a designer, and I said, could you help me design a mobile kitchen? And he did. And his name is Brian Doherty, and he designed the Charlie Cart. And then we had inspiration from the chuck wagon from the American Prairie.
Oh yeah. And, I can see that. That makes sense.
Right? Doesn't that make sense?
Yeah.
As a librarian, you would know about the chuck wagon, but a lot of people who are younger than us don't know what that is. So, that was the first, basically the first mobile kitchen, and it allowed the cowboys to stay out with the cows for longer periods of time because they could bring their food. So it was the kitchen. It was the kitchen wagon. So that's why it's called the Charlie Cart, because it's supposed to be the great grandchild of the chuck wagon, and it's bringing food education out to the American prairie.
Well, your program has been so successful and prolific. Now, at the last count that I've seen, there were 324 sites. Wow. Did you ever envision that it would be this successful?
I don't know if I envisioned that it would be, to be perfectly honest, I don't know if I had a vision about that.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that I knew that I wanted something like that, because when I was teaching in my kids' classrooms, I was just astonished to see that how impactful it was, that there are kids, even here in Berkeley, California, that have never tasted lettuce, or, that they would take third heaping helpings of salad. Kids who normally didn't eat vegetables. But the other benefit that really struck me is that for kids who are kinesthetic learners, it's just a pathway to success. You have teachers who tell you that there's a cycle that happens when kids kind of have outbursts, or they have a hard time sitting still, that then their peers start to treat them a certain way. And then the teacher kind of starts to see them a certain way, and it affects how the teacher behaves towards the child. And when they can be really successful in a different environment or a different way of learning, then their peers treat them differently and the teacher treats them differently, and it creates a cycle of positivity. So it's not just about health and food, but it's about this really well-rounded education. And I was just stunned by how quickly those benefits could be seen, how quickly they manifested. So sorry, remind me of your initial question, because I know I veered way off track.
No, you did fine, actually, because that was kind of following up. So did you envision that this would be so successful? Because you now have 324 sites, and that's, to me, just amazing.
Right. So I didn't envision. It's an interesting question, Dean, because I didn't really think about it like that. I thought I was surprised at how quickly people started calling. I was surprised at the variety of organizations that started calling, but I knew, like I said, I knew that I needed this. So I guess I wasn't surprised that other people also needed it, but maybe surprised at how much so, that I had kind of struck on a moment and something that could be easily popularized. Yeah.
You were talking a little bit about the pedagogy of this. Now, what is one of kind of the lesson plans that you have when you guys work on with the Charlie Cart with the young people?
So we have a curriculum actually with 54 lessons and recipes. And so, the recipes we talk a lot about making butter, because it's something that's in the curriculum. It's something that's incredibly simple, but everyone from children to adults absolutely love the butter lesson. It's very physically active because you're shaking the cream, and you can put on some music and make it really fun and move around the room. But you can add things into the butter. So you can talk about herbs, and you can talk about flavor, and you can talk about fat, and you can talk about science and what happens to the butter and how it morphs when you shake it, and what role the salt has in that. So you can really you can imagine as a librarian, right? Or if you're a teacher, you can imagine how you could scale that lesson up or down depending on what grade level or what age you're working with, to integrate just all kinds of lessons about health, about the environment, about science, about math, volume. Like there's just so many things you can do with it. So that's an example of the kind of lesson. And we imagine the kids working at different stations that they prepare the entire recipe. Now with COVID, it's a little different, obviously. So we're seeing a lot more demos and a little bit less of that communal hands-on kind of cooking.
This episode is sponsored by Culinary Historians of Northern California, a Bay Area educational group dedicated to the study of food, drink, and culture in human history. To learn more about this organization and their work, please visit their website at www.chnorcal.org. Living in the Bay Area and being in Berkeley and the areas around it so often, I'll see something like, I'll go to like Berkeley Bowl, then I'll drive, just 10 minutes away, and I'll be in a food desert. What led you and the others to kind of conceptualize the Charlie Cart? What were you thinking initially when you developed it?
I think the initial impetus was a lot of people want to have this experiential learning opportunity, and particularly around food. So how can we make it really easy for people? How can we make it easy for people who don't normally cook to understand how simple it can be, and to provide some revelatory recipes that help them see the possibilities? And for people who don't normally cook, I think just experiencing it a couple times really opens a lot of doors. I think that it can be really intimidating, and it doesn't have to be. So this is a way to say, let's just try some simple things. Let's just taste some different citruses. Let's just make some really simple recipes and get your hands on some fresh produce. So in terms of access, there's just a couple things about that. Firstly, there really is no access without education.
Yes.
So, right. So it's a two-pronged problem. Actually, it's a multi-pronged problem. But in these conversations, one of the things in the conversations about access, education is often overlooked as a critical component. And so I really feel like I am out there evangelizing for education. I just don't believe that you can use fresh produce and provide yourself and your family with quality nutrition if you don't know what to do with the produce. So there's the learning where to get it and how to pay for it, and understanding budgeting and meal planning. There's all of that piece. There's the actual physical access, how are folks getting this produce, but also that requires some demand too, right? So education also increases demand. And then there's the education piece. So once you have the produce, how are we going to make sure that it doesn't just go bad in the refrigerator?
Right.
Where it gets used.
No, that's a huge thing, because I've been there myself. I mean, I was able to get a lot of free food when I was living in Napa from people that had farms, and just Free Cycle. I was using that a lot to get free stuff to supplement our food income. And people were giving me stuff that if I didn't know how to cook it, I would have no way to preserve it or keep it around. And I had to kind of learn those things. And it's so important to be able to kind of like store things up, doing canning, learning to how to freeze stuff successfully so it doesn't turn to crap. It's all really important stuff. And I definitely know, I've been there, and I could tell you that education component is essential.
Oh, wow, Dean, that's really a powerful example. Yeah. I mean, I think about things like, if I don't have a lot of food in the refrigerator, I can dice up an onion and I can put an egg with it. And if it's a whole onion, which is really inexpensive, that can feed several people, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Like onions are a great way to stretch a meal. They're super nutritious, they're really delicious, and they're really inexpensive. And it's so simple. And it's just a simple little, I don't know if we want to call it a hack, but a simple little tip like that can really change how you can take care of yourself, right?
Oh, yeah. Now, the program has been on for 7 years. What are some of the impacts that you've seen from the program? What have you seen now 7 years on?
That is a great question. Well, first of all, the growth has been really surprising, like you said. The fact that we're seeing food education in so many different kinds of organizations. I think that ultimately we want to see food education everywhere that children gather to learn, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So we want it to be mainstream. So I do think that having this turnkey program that's accessibly priced and doesn't have annual membership fees, it's just a one-time fee. It's like this transaction that kind of liberates an organization to go forward with something new and try it and continue doing it without a ton of investment. So I think the biggest impact we're having is enabling different types of organizations to see food education as part of their work and to make food education part of their work. So we've got, VAs, and we have children's museums and farmers markets, which is maybe kind of an obvious one, but libraries really stepping up right now into food education and food access. It's just amazing to see how they're going. I'd say that's the biggest growing sector for Charlie Carter's, our libraries, and they're so much fun to work with, Dean.
Oh, yeah, I know librarians love this kind of thing. This is really in their wheelhouse. I want to talk with you about your book, New Favorites for New Cooks, 50 Delicious Recipes for Kids to Make. And it's a cook that I really love for many reasons. Number one, it's given me a lot of really good ideas for cooking for my kids who, when you have a lot of kids, you're a parent, kids can be picky, they can like different things. It can be not so fun to sometimes cook for kids. but this book brings along some really just genius ideas that I had not thought of. And I was like, kind of like, wow, that's a really good idea. What inspired you to write this cookbook?
Thank you. I'm glad that you like it. So there was a couple different things that inspired me to write it. When I was writing the curriculum, the Charlie Cart curriculum, I'm always intrigued by the ways that you can learn different things through cooking. It just seems so effortless and fun. It makes it fun. And I know that those recipes translated really well for kids, the Charlie Cart recipes. And I thought, oh, I can just turn this into a cookbook that'll be easy. It's never that easy. So that was part of it. Right.
It's
the
not.
other thing is that I had a lot of fun with my kids when they were growing up around food. And I have one kid who is definitely a kinesthetic learner. And so I was always challenging him in the kitchen. And it was also a way for us to get more time together. And we really bonded over food. And we would do, funny games like Spice Quest, where they would taste peppers and things like that. Or once I had my son, I brought home a whole bunch of squid. And I said, turn on YouTube and figure out how to clean it. And then he had so much fun with that, and he felt really empowered. He figured it all out by himself, and it's kind of a slimy, and it's got this sort of gross out vibe that kids actually love, even though they pretend that not to. So I just found it like a really engaging, cooking with my kids, a really engaging tool, and I wanted to pass that along. So that was the inspiration.
I really liked, so my first cookbook as a kid was my mom got me a copy of, because they just didn't have the cookbooks like they do now. And I think there was like one book out when I was young, and it was the French cookbook for kids. And it had things in it like escarole and endive and, sole, just different things that weren't as easy to get. So I mean, it was nice, but it was kind of ambitious. I like that your book is accessible, and it's like, I think it's good for beginner cooks, like you say in the title. What was the kind of testing and the writing part like when you're kind of devising the recipes? Was that a challenge for you to kind of come up with the recipes for it, or had you already kind of tried some of these things out with your kids?
Well, a lot of them were things that we would just eat on regular rotation at our house. So, but something that you do freestyle is actually kind of challenging to turn into a recipe. You have to be super disciplined. So I was so lucky that I had several people from the days when I was at Chez Panisse who helped me either develop a couple recipes or test all the recipes. I had Charlene Reese and Amalia Marino tested all the recipes for me. Amalia developed a couple recipes. And that was, another friend, Sue Chin Chin, who tested recipes too. So there were kind of a lot of quote unquote cooks in the kitchen. You kind of have to test things a lot of times too, because some people have a salty palate, some people have a sweet palate. And so for me, I wanted to try to find something in the middle. So I would have these testers, and I would get their feedback, and then I would have a different tester do it, and I would get different feedback, and then I would try to find the middle ground.
Now the production quality and the photography is just fantastic for this. Now this is a 10-speed press book, I understand, who always really does great cookbooks anyway. Were you concerned though, as a first time writer of cookbooks, were you concerned about the look of it and the production quality?
Well, I worked with this amazing editor, Jenny Wapner, who is at a different publishing house now, but she has done so many cookbooks. She's just a pro, and she's also really just a lovely person and so easy to work with. So that made it, I trusted her, and that made it easier. But that said, it's a pretty kind of intimidating process,
Yes.
right? The publishing company has they sort of own everything and they own you. And
Yeah, absolutely.
right. And they're like, this is what we know works. It doesn't really matter what you think at a certain point, and I think sometimes they're right. And other times you really want to push for what is important to you. I was really lucky. So I had worked with Samin Nosrat at Chez Panisse. And so
Wow.
I called her and said, this is really hard. And she said, let me just give you one piece of advice. She said, you're going to have to compromise. Just don't do anything you're embarrassed by.
I like
I thought that was, like, it's a little bit like, I don't know if you can relate to this, but planning a wedding is a little bit like that, right? You have to capitulate at a certain point to parents and family or whomever. And you just got to keep like one or two or three things, your top line things that you're not willing to compromise on. So I do want to say another word about the testing though, because it always makes me laugh that my kids had to eat those recipes so many times.
I hear that a lot from people, actually. The family becomes the guinea pigs.
Yes, so many times. Like there were times when I would just make something like 7, 10, 12 times in a row, and not over the course of a few weeks or months, but like over the course of 3 days. And they had to eat it all. And they were very gracious about it. And they still eat those foods today. So
I think that's a good testament to the book. I think that, it shows how good the recipes are.
Thank you.
Now, what's next for you?
Well, we really hope that Charlie Cart is going to do big things this year. So we're growing. We're gonna add new staff. We're actually hiring. So you can put that out there.
Nice.
We're going to launch a major evaluation initiative to see the impact of our work. We're going to increase our programming so we have more opportunities to bring our network together. And I really hope we are going to work more regionally, because we have these clusters of programs, and that offers a major opportunity for just facilitating partnerships and starting evaluation and just working more deeply in communities, or helping them to work more deeply together. But I still do want to get all 50 states. And right now we have 46 states. So
that's pretty impressive. I mean, I don't know, 7 years and that much, that's pretty good.
Well, we just want to know Utah, New Hampshire, Nebraska, and Washington State. Where are y'all? We want you. Come forth.
Well, if you're in those states and you're listening, talk to your local schools and educators about this. And I'll put the contact information in the bio for you as well.
Thanks for that plug, Dean.
Carolyn, I want to thank you for being on the program. I want to shout out for people in the Bay Area here. Charlie Cart recently is working with libraries in Alameda County and Contra Costa County, so check those things out. Carolyn, thank you for being on the program. I hope we get to have you on here again and talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much.
That was my conversation with Carolyn Federman of the Charlie Cart Project. You can purchase her book, New Favorites for New Cooks, 50 Delicious Recipes for Kids to Make, on all major book vendors, or you can actually buy it at all better bookstores like Omnivore Books in San Francisco. Next week on the program, we're going to be having Dennis Litley, who is the author of the Ask Dennis blog. It's been around for quite a while and is very famous. You've probably seen it yourself. He was a great guest, and I enjoy having you get to hear that conversation. If you want to share this podcast with others, we always enjoy and encourage people to share this on social media. If you want to leave a tip for me, there is a link in the bio that you can go to share information about the podcast and also leave a tip or feedback. If you want to also check out Asian Men Records, asianmenrecords.com. They have provided us with the intro and outro to the podcast, Talk About Love by Kitty Cat Fan Club. I encourage you to check out their website and check out the bands on there, buy some CDs, buy some records. They have lots of good vinyl. Also, you can get hoodies and really cool stickers too. I hope you all have a great week and keep cooking.